Shock factor, a term seemingly self-explanatory, but what should truly be deemed as shocking? And at what point does a work of art cross the boundaries from avant-garde to inappropriate? Although everyone perceives art through a unique lens, shock factor aims to stand against societal norms and practices, creating a sense of exclusion from the rest of the world. It often uses overtly taboo and controversial topics to the extreme as a means of pushing the viewer. Think and challenge views on what is considered typical. This element of surprise for the viewer can sometimes even push psychological boundaries by using deeply emotional and distressing subject matter to get the point across. One artist who brought extreme topics into this limelight was Francis Bacon. He stood out by depicting unfiltered, taboo subject matter and using shocking depictions of the human condition. To begin, I think it's important to look at Francis Bacon's background and home life. He was born in Dublin, Ireland, on a horse farm, where his severe asthma and animal allergies pushed him to stay indoors during the extent of his childhood. Within his rural environment, Bacon was often secluded and lonely, distanced from other children. And above all, his father eventually kicked him out when he discovered Bacon was homosexual. And with practically no money, he would travel to London, where he would become a drifter, often traveling from place to place, using gambling as an attempt to support himself. Nothing seemed to represent the unfortunate nature of his life more, however, than the brutality of World War II. He was no longer excluded from the outside world, and his identity was finally accepted, as society quickly morphed into a period of deep mourning and regret. Because his themes finally felt fitting amid the millions of lives lost, he achieved limited notoriety for his works just a few weeks before the end of World War II, and he rose to fame soon after. Bacon first struck on the impressionable and grief-stricken population of London when the city had already experienced thousands of deaths and mass destruction after the war. There he displayed his piece, Three Figures for the Base of a Crucifixion, at the Lefebvre Gallery. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, I am so sorry. Unlike the other works, however, Bacon's was frank and didn't attempt to soothe the minds of its viewers with exaggerated sensitivity. Instead, he displayed a truly gut-wrenching work of art that hit a little close to home for many of its viewers. The painting depicted was a triptych, consisting of 3 panels that each showcase a humanoid figure. The middle panel includes a predella, where an altar would be placed. The composition takes the audience on a journey from one horror to another. The eye is first drawn to the middle panel with a humanoid beastly figure facing the viewer head-on. Its uncanny grimace gives the audience a sense of foreboding, as if the figure is staring them down. Interestingly, its eyes are concealed by what could be a bandage, tying the work back to pain and suffering in the war. It suggests that one does not have to see the horrors to experience its effects. This was a prominent theme that many civilians who were not on the front lines felt, and even Bacon experienced, as his asthma kept him from fighting in the war. The sickly orange environment that holds the creatures is apocalyptic and reminiscent of the aftermath of a bombing. The other 2 figures sandwiched between the middle figure also writhe in agonizing pain. They appear more animalistic, like young birds begging for food from their mothers in a soulless landscape. One even sits on a patch of grass, burnt at its tips. He would continue with the theme of the mutilation of animals and its connection to humanity in his other pieces. Finally, the 3-dimensionality of the perspective lines appear in this piece as they trap the disgusting figures in a small and captive space. Like those on the front lines or even at home, there was no escape from eventually facing the horrors, and its ramifications could be seen at every turn. The most distinct feature of the characters is their mouths that lay agape, to resemble propaganda images from fascist Nazi dictators. This can be juxtaposed by another popular interpretation, where the figures' screaming mouths are actually cries of help from the victims of the Holocaust, as their necks move outwards towards the viewer. These meanings suggest that Bacon wanted the audience to be horrified by this piece. He wanted viewers to feel the guilt of self-destruction and genocide that they, the human race, had created, and its lasting effects, no matter how close or far away they were from the war. After all, the war was brought forth by society, and no matter how much one could try and dissociate from their peers, they were only one step away from the animal that lay within. A year after Bacon's first success came the infamous painting 1946. The piece expanded on much of Bacon's previous themes as he dived even deeper into exploring the guilt and disturbing nature of World War II. With audiences having a year to reflect on the war by now, Bacon wanted to remind his viewers not to forget the past too quickly. The painting once again includes a figure with obscured eyes, making the work appear even more unalive. The cross motif is seen prominently with a beef carcass positioned like Jesus Christ. Although Bacon was interested in butcher shops, the carcass may have symbolized the connection between slaughterhouses and the brutality of the war. Similarly to how humans hunt other animals, humans were murdering their own kind for their own gain. Bacon would later even mention himself, "If I go into a butcher shop, I always think it's surprising that I wasn't there instead of the animal." This illustrated just how closely he saw the animal in humans and how violence is indistinguishable across humanity and the world itself. Birds can be seen feeding off of the animal carcass, positioned similarly to how the figures were in his last work. Had they finally found their food, a substance to feed off of? It's hard to answer questions like these in this work, however, much of it remains shrouded in mystery. A well-dressed man stands at the center of the image, his upper face completely opaque. Above his toothy expression lays bloodied remains caught in his beard. It is hard to determine whether this man is the victim or the villain in the scene, but the same could be said for the results of the war. With time to reflect, society began to question if all the violence was necessary. Had the heroes done more killing than what was needed? Had everyone lost their mind, and that's why the figure's brain is completely shadowed as if removed? Bacon may have been trying to explore these themes for the man, leaving the answer ultimately ambiguous. Through the figure's formal attire and time period, however, Bacon may have been alluding to the Prime Minister of Britain, Neville Chamberlain. This is because of his use of similar-looking umbrellas and uniform political attire. The windows in the background may also be a direct reference to a circulated photograph that was taken of Hitler's bunker. The vibrant yellow boutonniere may have been of a yellow daffodil, a symbol of respect for those who fought in the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. Chamberlain's feature in this painting could have been used ironically as a disturbing jab at dark humor by the painter. This is because Chamberlain was very unpopular at the time of the war for appeasing the Nazis and making offers with Hitler to keep peace. He even briefly delayed declaring war after Poland was invaded. Essentially, the contrast between symbols of respect and the menacing background may show how officials in power worry about keeping a formal and sophisticated appearance while having complete control over how their power can be used. Bacon explained the sporadic and jumbled nature of the piece when he said, "I had no intentions to do this picture. I never thought of it that way. It was like one continuous accident mounting atop another." This technique, Bacon was able to show his audience a completely raw and unedited version of how he saw the catastrophe that lay out in front of him, and how it still continued to shape modern society a year after World War II. With the effects of World War II slowly fading out of the foreground, Bacon used his techniques of shocking an audience to explore another controversial topic, his homosexuality. Pleasure from BDSM, which can be defined as bondage, discipline, submission, and sadomasochism, and years of abuse. His painting's two figures shows two males engaging in a act, with their faces smeared into one another. Although this leaves their expressions muddled, the gray and cool color tones of the piece signify that this act is not pleasurable. The box they are trapped in and a bright white, messily made bed create a sense of isolation and contrast the physical closeness of Smex. The isolation would be understandable because at this time, was illegal, sequestering the pair in secrecy behind closed doors. With distrust of homosexuals on the rise because of the Cold War and the ongoing lavender scare of the 1950s, they faced the fear of being caught even when acting in secrecy. And with all eyes now on these two men in the painting, the private is newly public. Their act had been displayed to the gazes of any of the painting's onlookers. This may signify why they stare out toward the viewer with blurred expressions, masking their identities in sheer terror. The piece was most likely inspired by a lover, Peter Lacy, in Bacon's life. Although Lacy seemed like a charming man, he struggled heavily with alcohol abuse and often resorted to violence when drunk. The couple would frequently get into physical altercations, where Bacon would provoke Lacy into abuse, which turned into acts of forced. Surprisingly, Bacon found pleasure in this treatment and enjoyed BDSM. As Lacy began to lose control, his endearing front was slowly slipping away, revealing his dark inner psyche. Bacon enjoyed seeing the animalistic tendencies come out of Lacy, showing once again that there was no difference between mankind and the animal within. Overall, Bacon's work found ways to captivate, engage, and unsettle his audiences. Although surreal and often greatly distorted, the characters reflected the exact fears society was facing. Instead of presenting surface-level depictions of war, violence, and sexuality, his art went deeper, showing exactly what the raw anxiety and discomfort looked and felt like. It did not matter to him whether his art was healthy or sensitive to the subject matter at hand. It was his ugly truth and the unhealthy struggles he and many millions of others faced. And through the vagueness of what Bacon presented, the viewers might easily attribute their own personal beliefs and emotions to his pieces. Instead of directly looking into Bacon's chaotic life, they could see the unhealthy and even animalistic tendencies that peeked out for each theme discussed. However, on the topic of shock factor, although still perturbing today, Bacon's work may not provide the same deep-rooted sense of dread as they did for those in the past, as subject matter that was historically controversial has become more normalized in today's society. A prime example of this occurring is Edward Munch's expressionist painting, The Scream. Viewers today have less charged reactions to the piece than audiences in the 19th century, who saw the horrific face and anxiety-inducing lucidity of the lines as a representation of mental health, a topic not prominent in the media. Much like how The Scream is still highly regarded today, it is crucial to acknowledge the significant impact Bacon had on the art world and how he continues to shape shock art to this day. For example, English artist Tracey Emin gained notoriety when her 1998 work, My Bed, was displayed at the Tate Gallery. When the artist was in a depressive and downward spiral, she stayed bound in bed for days, accumulating a mass of dirty clothes stained with menstrual blood, condoms, and trash. When she came out of the spiral, she decided to use the scene as a work of art. She created. Like much of Bacon's work, she left the details alone, portraying the raw scene without any additional alterations. The bed alone was thought-provoking and provocative enough. With a change in time as well that was more encouraging of self-expression, Emin was able to display this piece with both support and widespread criticism. This was an opportunity Bacon did not always have due to the illegality of some of his subject matter, where his pieces were kept from the public. Overall, the viewers during Bacon's era were not ready for his art, just like most viewers were not prepared for Emin's. But that is exactly what the principles of shock factor in art are: to expose the world to something new and watch as a society slowly begins to feel comforted in the uncomfortable.